November 29th, 2019. It was just before 9:45 a.m. I had been up for a couple days. I hadn't slept. I was in a really bad bout of depression. I was drinking. I was taking pills, and I had turned off all the lights in my place. I had closed all the blinds. I had broken all the mirrors in my place because I wanted it as dark as possible. I remember I went and I sat down with my back to the wall. In front of me were letters that I had written, and I picked up a gun off the floor. And I put it in my mouth and I pulled the trigger. My name is Jason McLean. I am the author of the book One Drop of Water. I am a mental health and suicide prevention advocate. And this is my story. In the moment between realizing that I was still alive, I was overwhelmed with guilt and shame, and I was angry because I had failed at the one thing that I had set out to do. In that moment, I had a choice to make, and that choice was, do I either end this life, or do I fight and begin my life and do everything I can? And I chose the latter of the two. The next day I woke up and I started documenting everything that I was thinking and feeling. I began writing everything down. The most important thing for me was to identify and simplify all the different things that were causing me to be depressed. So I started really immersing myself into finding out what was actually me and what was the nucleus of who I was. In doing so, I found out that I had an incredibly poor relationship with myself. All of it stemmed to stuff that happened to me when I was a kid and in my teenage years that I had never addressed and I had never dealt with. That weight kept picking up more and more weight as life went on, and it got too heavy for me and I crumbled. It was too heavy for me, as strong as I thought I was. I was looking at all these papers in front of me, and I actually started to tape them all up all over my place, all over the walls, and interconnect them, compartmentalize them, and then decompartmentalize them. I could understand them and then find a way to effectively remedy them. And that's what I did. And it looked a little bit like a serial killer sort of collage you see in the movies. It was like the universe. It was like my own universe, just like the constellations all met up, and it started to light up. And that was the day that I decided I needed to write a book and share all this experience and the things that led up to it so that I could become a voice for the voiceless. I was given a second chance, and with that second chance came the idea to write this book. Yeah, so when I was young, I had a lot of behavioral issues, and I had definitely some cognitive and learning disabilities. I was a little bit different than a lot of kids my age. I've had challenges with suicidal ideation since I was a child. I tried to hang myself when I was 8 years old. I was being severely abused by my dad's partner at the time. Psychologically and physically, she was torturing me. A family friend had took his life, and I remember asking my father about it. And it all just clicked in my head as a little boy. I just asked him why he would do that, and he said that his life got too hard for him to live, and all he felt was pain and didn't want to feel that anymore. And it was like a light bulb went off. I had a lot of trouble fitting in, and later in life I would, realize that that's because I never learned how to become comfortable within myself, because I didn't know who I was. I started to see a renowned child psychologist or psychotherapist here, and some diagnoses were made, and it got really tough. It got really hard on my parents. Both my parents, they were separated, and they were both told basically tough love was the remedy for this, and if I ran away, not to let me in, and if I was angry and I was threatening or as all these different things, to not let me in or to call the police. I ended up living on the streets as a teenager, and that was hard. I know it broke my parents' heart. As a younger child, the fear was that I would be a psychopath, and I was downgraded to a sociopath. So all this was sort of thrown at me when I was a teenager. And there's a very grim outcome depicted by this psychiatrist, or psychologist that I was seeing, that I would never be able to live a normal life. I would probably have to live with my parents forever, that I'd never be able to understand or respect responsibility, that I wouldn't be able to care for myself, all these things. I joined my first street gang. I was welcome there. My violence was celebrated. I had a family that I felt I belonged with. But I was living on the streets, and that's kind of where it just all made sense. I lived dual lives as an adult, where I spent a lot of time associated with biker gangs, and then I tried to live my life as Tyler Mclean. And I kind of separated them. Had this duality, I guess, to it. It's been a long battle with depression, lifelong. Although I wrote a book on it, and I often am promoting a lot of the more positive side of things to deal with mental illness, I still struggle, I still fight. I'm still challenged by it constantly. For me, humor was a way of coping with everything, as well as you'll hear sadly, a lot of comedians and actors, such as like Robin Williams, are the most depressed people in the world. And they've used their humor just like I did, because first of all, it's an incredible camouflage technique to make it look like you're happy and everything's fine. But I think it really stems from inside, because you just want to make other people happy because you can't feel it, and you get to feel a little piece of their happiness. So the other coping mechanism for me was anger. I think I inherited a little bit of the behavior from what I saw around me and the people in my life. But it also became a really easy way to push people away from me, so they couldn't get close to me. Which is really odd, because all I ever really wanted was someone to be close to me. I had the world fooled. I always looked like I had everything. I was dressed really nice. I always looked like I was in shape. I had all the great stories to tell everyone, and I could solve all the world's problems when I spoke to you. And when I was out and about and I was being social, I was always better. The problem for me is when I went home. I couldn't be alone. Going to sleep for me is terrifying, because I'm alone with my thoughts. I discovered that I had little self-discipline, and I had no self-respect, and I had no love for myself, and I needed to come up with a system that made sense to me in order to make those work together. So I drew a triangle, and at the top of the triangle I put self-discipline, and on this side I put self-respect, and over here I put self-love. The important one in the beginning was self-discipline. And so I implemented exercise and learning as many new things as I could to challenge my brain consistently to invite neural activity and new growth. And so with that newfound self-discipline, what started to happen was I started to eliminate a lot of old bad habits. And when I started to eliminate those bad habits, that slid down to that self-respect corner of the triangle. So as I learned to become more disciplined, I learned how to respect myself more. And when I learned to respect myself more and started to eliminate the negative things in my life, is when I started to find out how I could love myself. With that discipline and with that respect for myself, I had a newfound love for myself. I learned how to respect myself, and that illuminated this feeling that I had never seen before. It had been very dark in that part of my life. And I started to learn how to forgive myself. I started to learn how to stop blaming everyone and myself. And that's when I started to I treated myself like a friend. I believe that so many people that are depressed have a horrible relationship with themselves. And so this was really, really powerful for me. And I've implemented this transformation triangle, we'll call it, into my daily action plan that I do every day. But the most important thing is inside that triangle, the matter that holds it all together is belief. And when you can believe in all these things that are really happening and believe that your discipline is fueling your love for yourself and the respect for yourself and all the way around, it holds that triangle together no matter how much it flexes whichever way. And so I created that as a model for myself. I had spent, my childhood and teenage years in therapy and all these different things. And for me, it had left a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth. And I made the decision that I wanted to do this on my own. I wanted to prove it to myself that I could do this. I had been codependent on people a lot of my life. I'd always been kind of waiting for someone to come save me from myself. And it was in this moment that I realized I'm the only one that can do that. There's no one coming to save me. And that was fuel for the fire, for writing my book. And my book doesn't necessarily have to be for someone with depression or that's suicidal or has, a mental illness per se, but everybody has a state of mental health. So I wrote this book, One Drop of Water, a little plug, because it's time that ends. Some people will read my book and they'll say to me, it's crazy what you went through. I can relate to a lot of it, but, I went through some things too, but they weren't as bad. And that breaks my heart because it's not a contest, but we've been always kind of conditioned to think that way. And that's part of the stigma that surrounds this right now. I get so many people that message me every day that have read this book. And they tell me about when they were in the same place I was. They had pills in their hand. They were ready to let it go. And they tell me their story, and that's heartbreaking in its own way, but at the same time, that's exactly why I wrote this book, to start these conversations. But what breaks my heart the absolute most is that every one of those people apologizes to me for telling me their story. And that's the problem, that's the stigma, and that's because we've been conditioned that something's wrong with us or something's bad about this. If you're lost, and you're alone, and you feel like you don't belong anywhere, I know how that feels, and I want you to know that this world is a better place because you're in it, and that you're amazing and you're unique, and that these things are temporary, and that you are strong and you are beautiful and you can get through it.